It is April, which means it's time for the tier shifts. In competitive Pokemon are organized into tiers so that you can use your favorite Pokemon with Pokemon of a similar power level. Tiers are based on how often a Pokemon is used. The idea is that people play to win, so the best Pokemon get used the most. There is no need for some dictating authority to tell you what is good and what is bad. The people themselves decide through their actions. Every 3 months, based on the usage statistics of the hundreds of thousands of games played on Pokemon Showdown, Pokemon are shifted up or down a tier. If a Pokemon gets 4.52% usage in a tier, it moves to that tier. For example, if a PU Pokemon suddenly started getting a lot of usage in OU, it could move to OU. We are going to talk about every shift for the month of April. Volcanion made a jump from the RU tier to the OU tier. One of the biggest reasons is the Kyurem ban. Volcanion's fire and water combination is deadly, but unfortunately completely walled by Kyurem. Another unfortunate effect was that one of Kyurem's best checks was Slowking, which itself counters Volcanion. Volcanion had options like Toxic for Kyurem and Slowking, but overall it wasn't a Pokemon worth using. But with Kyurem gone, Volcanion has become a powerful attacker that is very difficult to switch into. Fire and water is inherently a great combination, and it can be tough to switch into either heavy-duty boots or Choice Specs Volcanion because of Volcanion's signature move Steam Eruption. Volcanion also has moves like Sludge Wave to beat Tapu Fini. Steel types are very common, and Volcanion is a great way to put pressure on them. The Kyurem ban also made weathers like Rain even more powerful, and Volcanion fits perfectly on that team. Not only does it have a Choice Specs Rain boosted Steam Eruption, it also has Water Absorb to make sure your opponent doesn't use your Rain against you. For the same reasons, it's also good versus opposing Rain. Scizor drops from OU to UU, another victim of the Kyurem ban. Scizor was used a lot because it beat Pokemon like Kyurem without being weak to Earth power. Without Kyurem, Scizor still has some utility with its strong Bullet Punch for Weavile and its ability to wall Tapu Lele. A strong U-turn is always good too, but overall beating Kyurem was one of its main selling points. There are a lot of good steel types, but it's hard to justify using Scizor instead of Heatran or Melmetal, which are both stronger and bulkier. Corviknight also is better defensively as it's immune to spikes and has slightly more bulk. Scizor has some usage as a Swords Dance sweeper on Aurora Veil Hyper Offense because it can be challenging to KO, but that's mainly its only niche. Scizor is not an OU caliber Pokemon anymore. Hippowdon dropped from OU to UU because of metagame changes itself. Once upon a time, Hippowdon was common and good, but once Landorus T and Garchomp were released, it became more difficult to justify using Hippowdon. Hippowdon is very bulky and passive. It's a great wall with Toxic and Slack Off, but it can't do much besides that. Bulky teams may like Hippowdon more, but a lot of other teams would prefer the more offensive Landorus T or Garchomp. The general inertia of change is what kept Hippowdon up in OU, but its relevance was fading every day. Hippowdon was able to hold on to the OU tier in the Kyurem metagame because it fit well on the bulky teams that were common to deal with Kyurem. Bulky teams with Blissey were some of the ways to deal with Kyurem before the ban. The final nail in the coffin was that Air Balloon Heatran became popular to switch into other Heatrans because of Flash Fire. Hippowdon's most common moveset, Earthquake, Stealth Rock, Toxic, and Whirlwind, cannot touch Heatran. It's not that Hippowdon is all of a sudden bad in OU, it's just that more team structures would get more value out of Landorus or Garchomp. Cobalion moved up from the RU tier to the UU tier. Cobalion has always been a Pokemon with great utility. It has a great typing, good versatility, and great speed. But what finally pushed it into UU is that it's a Zarude counter. It resists both stab moves and outspeeds Zarude. Zarude itself had a brief stint in RU when DLC power creep pushed it down. But once those threats either got banned or rose back up to OU, Zarude moved to UU in response and is now a top tier UU Pokemon because of its power and pivoting ability. Cobalion moved up to UU in response to Zarude. Darmanitan moved from RU to UU and Torkoal moved from ZU to UU. That is because of Sun. Sun has become more popular in UU because of Venusaur. Venusaur can use Growth to double its special attack and it becomes a monster in Sun. As a result, Torkoal, the best Sun setter, moved to UU. Darmanitan in the Sun is a good second wall breaker after Venusaur with its powerful Sun boosted Flare Blitz. Sun has always been a borderline UU strategy, so the rise in usage can be explained through natural fluctuations in opinions on the playstyle. Torkoal ended up becoming the main Sun setter because it has more defensive utility and access to Rapid Spin. Rapid Spin is valuable on Sun teams as Pokemon like Darmanitan need hazards to be off, and Torkoal's roll compression and ability to use Rapid Spin and Stealth Rock on one Pokemon mean you have more team slots that can do other things. The reason Torkoal saw such a huge jump from ZU to UU is because either Sun isn't good without sweepers like Venusaur like in RU, or Drought itself is banned like in NU, where there are too many Sun sweepers relative to the power level. Grimmsnarl is moving from the RU tier to the NU tier. It is moving down. Grimmsnarl has been on a freefall ever since Light Clay was banned in UU and RU. Grimmsnarl was one of the best Light Screen Reflect Pokemon because of its ability Prankster. Light Screen Reflect as a playstyle was overpowered, and any Light Screen Reflect user would have been acceptable for the playstyle. It just happens that Grimmsnarl is the best one. Unfortunately, Grimmsnarl is not very good outside that role, and once the playstyle itself was nerfed, Grimmsnarl's usage fell off completely and it now dropped to the NU tier. Stakataka dropped to the NU tier, and the main problem for Stakataka is that there's so much competition for the Steel-type slot in RU. Stakataka is not itself bad, but Registeel, Metagross, and even Steelix are all more consistent at what they do, being a bulky Steel-type Stealth Rocker. Offensive Stakataka isn't as good because of these Steel types. Its powerful Gyro Ball and Stone Edge get walled easily. Stakataka is useful when you want a Steel type that isn't weak to fire, but that role itself is incredibly niche. Machamp moved up to the NU tier. This is purely cosmetic. Machamp is banned from the PU tier, so it could only be used in NU and above anyway. The distinction is now it's not just overpowered in PU, but also viable in NU. Machamp has risen in popularity as a slow but powerful wall breaker, becoming even better than Surfetch. It's better than Surfetch because it's more consistent as a wall breaker, and because of its ability Guts, it doesn't have to worry about status. This is very important because Flame Body Talonflame has emerged as a top Pokemon in NU, and is often used defensively to switch into attackers. Other fighting types like Passimian or Surfetch have to be incredibly scared of getting burnt every time they attack, while Machamp does not. The flexibility of being able to play without fear is huge, and is a big part of why Machamp has moved up to the NU tier. Hitmontop moved up from the PU to the NU tier, but actually Hitmontop is not good at all in NU. It's unranked on the NU viability rankings, which means it is unviable. There are better fighting types like Passimian, Scrafty, or even Machamp, and Hitmontop's stats are not good at all. All it has is Rapid Spin. The culprit is that one person plays NU a lot and loves using Hitmontop despite it being bad. Ladder is a bit of a monkey see monkey do type of thing, and people who see interesting or unusual Pokemon may incorporate it into their own teams. The NU ladder is unfortunately not as popular as other tiers, and a few people are able to influence the tier just enough to push a Pokemon from PU to NU by playing enough games. There are protections in place to help versus this type of thing. For example, games are weighted based on your ladder rating. You contribute more to the usage stats if you have a higher rating. But these Hitmontop games are being played by people high enough on the ladder, and it looks like that was enough to move Hitmontop to NU, despite it not being a good NU Pokemon. Comfey has dropped from the NU tier to the PU tier. Comfey is just not a good Pokemon in NU anymore. The main utility of Comfey over other fairy types is that it can attack first with Tri-Edge, but all the top threads have a good matchup versus anyway, like Talonflame, Copperajah, Dragalge, Escavalier, Salazzle, and the list goes on and on. It doesn't matter if Comfey attacks first because it's doing so little damage anyway and would get only one hit KO'd next turn. In the fairy type slot, you would rather use something like Sylveon, which is bulkier and stronger. It's a surprise that Comfey has lasted this long in the tier. Many of its issues have existed for a long time, but the inertia of change had kept Comfey in the NU tier. Garbodor has dropped from NU to PU mainly because of metagame trends. Garbodor does very little damage to steel types even with Stomping Tantrum, and it lets ground types come in for free. This is a big problem when Copperajah and Silvally Ground are the top Pokemon in the tier. More often than not, you would rather use Weezing, which has Fire Blast for steel types and Levitate for ground types. Will-O-Wisp is also very important for deterring physical attacks on Weezing. Garbodor's main advantage is Spikes, but guess what? Xatu is a major Pokemon in NU who can stop Spike with Magic Bounce. Oftentimes, Spikes are so valuable that Garbodor can justify itself on teams, but not anymore. Xatu blocks those spikes, and Garbodor's other flaws all become all the more obvious, and it becomes difficult to justify using Garbodor instead of Weezing, and it dropped to the PU tier. There is also an unofficial tier known as ZU that exists below PU in the hierarchy that is not considered a standard tier, but if you would like to know more about why certain Pokemon moved in between PU and ZU, let me know down in the comments below. But that's it for the April 2022 tier shifts. Were you surprised by anything? What do you think will be the most impactful changes? Do you think anything will get banned? Let me know.